we are really on a turning point. There's a lot of things that are going to happen and that will change our societies profoundly. Western societies will also be changed from within. So who has control, who has access to your data? The data are much more powerful than tanks. I call a non-programmable CBDC is like a vegetarian tiger. You can let him play with your kids because you've seen him eat carrots.
They will be able to control your transactions, control how much money you even have, cap it, have a maximum.
Absolutely.
A limit to spending it, meaning like you have 30 days to spend that amount of money on those certain goods.
That's very feasible, yes.
All those things are then within reach. And on top of that, this whole process is undemocratic and has absolutely no involvement of the people who will be subjected to this.
The largest issue is that people don't know what's going on.
Welcome to the Macroscopic podcast, presented by Gold Republic. My name is Alexei Jordanov, and on this format, I invite you to look at the world through different lenses, to see what's hidden in plain sight. We'll dive deep to understand the forces that drive macroeconomics, financial markets, and the nature of money, with alternative assets like gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. We'll also investigate how geopolitics and power games shape the world we live in, but also what can we learn from history to understand the present and prepare for the future? Today, I have the pleasure to welcome Arno Wellens, an acclaimed financial investigative journalist who is known to have uncovered financial frauds, covered extensively the Euro crisis, and led alarming investigations about the technical bankruptcy of banks like Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse more than 5 years ago. In this episode, we'll address everything you need to know about the creation of the digital euro. What is it? What is its value? Do we need it? Is it created according to the democratic process? Will it come to life? If yes, what will be the steps? And most importantly, what is the hidden agenda behind its creation? In a world where our data and privacy is already being under threat, money is the last bastion of freedom. In the wrong hands, the digital euro could become a tool used by European institutions, governments, and banks to transform the Eurozone into a digital dictatorship, just like the dystopia we see in communist China. We'll conclude the conversation with a bit of a more positive note, looking at possible alternatives and how to protect ourselves of such kind of bleak future. I hope that you'll get fresh insights and new perspectives. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. You can also leave a reaction down below in the comment section. But most important of all, if you believe that this is a really important topic, that more people need to hear this, share it. Welcome, Arno Wellens.
Thank you.
We haven't spoken to each other since a while, since the last episode of the Gold Republic podcast.
Yes.
It's been, I think, more than a year and a half ago. And we've already touched upon a lot of topics that we will cover today. But first and foremost, for our viewers and for our listeners, I think it's also good to know a bit who you are, especially for those who will hear you or see you for the first time in their life. So I was thinking maybe it would be good to share what actually brought you to investigative journalism and what motivates you as well.
Oh, I think you might call it a coincidence. So I've worked for several banks. Many people abroad probably don't know it, but you have the Dexia scandal, the Legio lease scandal, investment scheme. It was about 6 billion euro when lost. But it's actually the third largest investment scam in the world.
Wow.
From the Netherlands. It was end 90s. I used to work there. I had no idea what I was doing, and then I did. I've worked for an accounting firm, an audit firm. Got totally bored. And then another investigative journalist suggested I would come to his magazine. Because I was probably the only one. That's what he said. In the world of the blind, one eye is king. If you would just become a financial journalist now, you would be the only one capable of reading the annual statements of a bank. Precisely at that moment, they all went bust, and I had a lot of work. Then the Euro crisis began, and the euro crisis is being solved, not really solved, but solved on a day-to-day basis with muddling through. And that's what we are witnessing right now.
So rather postponed.
Yes.
Yeah.
All sorts of difficult measures are being postponed, so you don't have to talk about real issues. That's what's constantly happening. That's my life in a nutshell. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, what then motivates you, like in what you do? Because you worked as an accountant, you could have made money. Clearly, you're not making this for the money.
With all due respect, somebody needs to do their job. Auditing is an essential part of capitalism. I mean, if you invest your money somewhere, you need to know what they're doing with it.
Yeah.
It's very obvious, but it's also a repetitive job because you have to do checks. Like I said, somebody needs to do it. I couldn't do it, so I'm happy with the way it turned out. The way it turned out for me, but I think what's happening now is that this muddling through becomes really ugly, and in a while you just need to actually damage democracy. That's where you're going. And there's plenty of examples of it. One thing is, if you need a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, if that's what you want for your central bank to have, and you want it to actually help the central bank perform well, so the central bank has more monetary policy transmission, that's what they call it. It needs to be digital. It needs to be an account-based version, so you're logging in. If you do that, all your data is centralized on one place. So you have no more privacy, I believe you say in English. All this data can be used, and the first signs are there for prosecution.
Okay.
So one might say, well, you know what, I'm going to put all my data in one place. I trust my government. To be honest, if you look at also recent failings of our government, you should definitely not trust your government with all your data. And even if they don't mean to do anything wrong, they could simply lose it, which is also what's happening during the pandemic. The government was hoarding all this data for health purposes, but nobody actually knew what the health effect was. But once they started and once there were funds to do this, they continued.
But back to the question, why investigative journalism?
And
what drives you? Because it's clearly not the money.
No, but I don't know actually. I just fell into it, I might say, and it felt good. And I think,
but
okay,
what drives you to find out those answers, and why CBDCs? Why balance sheets of banks? Is there something like I don't know, worth like an inspector type of drive that wants to solve a crime, but then in a financial manner? Like,
okay, I must say, let's put it this way: if I would have done the same in the 80s in Finland, when there was really nothing wrong, if you would have been a financial journalist in Finland in the 80s, and then some corporation would miss its sales target by 0.25% or so, you know, that's all that's happening over there. If you're very honest, if you look at the world that we live in right now, and it's a cliche, but it doesn't mean it's not true. We are really on a turning point. There's a lot of things that are going to happen, and that will change our societies profoundly. Western societies will also be changed from within. So who has control, who has access to your data? The data are much more powerful than tanks, actually, if you think about it. Because Yuval Harari, people who look at...
brief history of
man, yeah.
Man and
that's it. He's
Homo Deus.
If you look what you can do with data, also in a negative way, that's the future. That's where we're heading. And the way I see it, some prospects are bleak, because if you want to fully utilize the potential of what you could do with digitalization, which could mean a lot of things. Yes, absolutely. It's a force for good, but there's also a downside, and the first signs that the uglier parts will prevail. They are there. For example, you can use digitalization for making more efficient payment systems, but you can also use it to prosecute people.
Yeah,
that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So that's the future. If you want to know what the future is, you look into this subject matter.
Yeah, and I think also we're doing this interview from our office here in Amsterdam, and to my knowledge, and if correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've seen the devastative consequences of how government could turn wrong in this country as well in the 1940s when the Nazis took.
I didn't want to say it, but yes.
The government and actually the Dutch, public servants at that time collaborated to some extent.
Yes.
And most of all, and I think that's the irony, is that the Dutch civil registry was one of the most advanced, if not the most advanced in the Western or developed world at that time.
Absolutely.
Meaning that they had crucial information about who was who, and thereby in the persecution of Jewish people.
Absolutely. About 95% of all Jewish people were exterminated in the Netherlands. It's the highest score.
Exactly. And I was about to.
It's higher than in Germany itself.
And exactly. Germany and France as well, which was also half under occupation, and the Vichy government that collaborated with the Nazis as well. So the very well-oiled functioning system, if in the wrong hand, can turn really badly.
Yes. And then you must ask yourself, exactly, then maybe we shouldn't want to have this certain capacity. And it's the same like the death penalty. One could say, well, the death penalty, if you don't convict the wrong person, if you don't sentence the wrong person to death, only real whatever rapists and killers and whatever, if you don't make any mistakes, well, then you don't need to worry about it. But that's not the point. If you want to make sure that it doesn't go wrong, then you shouldn't have that form of power in the first place. And that's the kind of discussions where we're heading. And what happened with CBDC is that people say, well, maybe there will be a variant without interest rates. Probably no, that's not the case. Once you cross a certain bridge, you're in a different country, and all these aspects will show up with their ugly sides. Yeah. And once you, I think the very common example that people can understand, or at least in the Netherlands, but probably also elsewhere, is traffic cameras. So if you drive your car around, if you can still afford it, you see all these cameras, and all these cameras were placed by the infrastructure departments of various governments because they wanted to know which roads are congested. Very simple. You use it for data analysis. So how do we spend our budget? Expanding roads and improving roads. That's very good. Then the data became real time, so you could actually watch congestions form, which is also very good for analysis. Then there was software that could read license plates. Then the police said, well, we want to use that to follow people, etc., and to send them traffic tickets.
Or tax purposes, huh?
Also, that's the next part. What happens in the Netherlands, for example, if you have a company car and you can drive more than 200 kilometers with it for personal purposes, you need to be taxed as if it was a payment, which does make sort of sense. I mean, you get a car from your employer. You need to you use it for going to work, but you can also go on holiday with it. Well, then it's a form of wage. So you should pay income tax. But the rule in the Netherlands is if you only use it for 200 kilometers, then it's so.
Yeah,
so
it's more like the road tax. Like if you have a Dutch,
road, yes.
Like I don't know, like a Polish license plate, and you drive in the Netherlands for more than 6 months, you're not paying the road tax, and thereby like they're able.
They will find you. If they want to, they can find you. What they did is that they used the camera system that was built for the infrastructure department. Why do you put them there? Because you need to make wise investments with respect to infrastructure. Well, okay. What they did afterwards is that they used these cameras. They actually used the cameras near how do you call it? Theme parks. So if you have a small family and you're using your company car to go to the theme park, that may be avoidance of tax.
That's how far. Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah,
that's how it ends. So I mean, if you have a company car and you're on a Saturday, you actually drive towards the theme park. That's not work related. So you're avoiding tax. That's how they follow people.
Wow.
And it becomes uglier and uglier. What they did recently is that they had an algorithm. Dutch tax authorities did that. They had an algorithm that taught itself who was more inclined to being fraudulent with respect to subsidies also for daycare and so on and so forth. This algorithm taught itself that specifically people with a Turkish background are more criminal than others. This algorithm taught itself, so the algorithm presents possible cases of fraud to employees within the tax authority. Said, well, you should go look after this family, after this family, after this family. It's
some sort of minority report type of thing where they forecast in the future which...
That's it. The problem is, if you do that, if you target a specific minority more often than another minority, or...
It's a self-reinforcing bias.
Exactly, because they get prosecuted more often, and then the algorithm tells itself, I told you so, I'm right. And even within the European Union, you have the algorithm, European data space. So tax authorities within the EU can share algorithms with each other.
Okay.
So that's how it can spread. So it starts with cameras for making better infrastructure decisions, and it ends with basically breaking rule number one, the first article in our constitution, which is against racial discrimination. It's being broken just like that.
Yeah.
And what really bothers me, it happened since the pandemic, is that you can actually just do that. You can actually just break the constitution. You can break the Dutch constitution. And then people say, well, it's an emergency.
So false pretenses, false pretext. And
absolutely. And it started with the pandemic.
Yeah.
So first they said, well, people have a right to protest. Yes, but there's a pandemic. But the right to protest is mentioned in our constitution. Well, then the constitution should be put aside. And what's happening now is that big companies, and they are united in the World Economic Forum. People say that you're a conspiracy theorist if you do that. But if you just go to the website of the Dutch Parliament, you'll find a report. And it's a letter from our government to the Parliament. And they say it's called Kamerbrief Visie Digitale Identiteit. Sorry for the Dutch. Vision on Digital Identity. I think if you type this in the search engine, you'll actually find the report. And then it says, well, we are going to proceed with digital identity because the companies that support the World Economic Forum, it's Amazon.com, ING Bank, etc., they believe that they can make more money for themselves with digital identity. And the problem is that if you're on your phone and you're scrolling in Instagram or whatever, and you see an ad, I mean, the amount of energy that it takes to enable scrolling, mindless scrolling for everybody, it takes huge amounts of data, energy, data warehouses, and they're being paid for with ads. Only the problem is that you'll just get these ads, and it's cookie-based behavior, so they're tailor-made for you. But if you don't need a pair of shoes, you're not going to buy them. And what's happening is that these companies, they have asked a Danish firm, Bmart, to analyze how much shopping carts worldwide are being abandoned. So you're scrolling on Instagram, you see all these nice cats or whatever.
It happens to me yesterday.
And then you get an ad and you click on it. Oh, that's a nice pair of shoes or fishing rods or whatever, or bikini. Or you click on it and then say, oh, you want to buy this? Where should we send it? By the way, you also have to pay. Once that happens, you have to switch apps, and it will take you 10, 15 seconds or so to, log into your payment system, whatever you use. And within those 10, 15 seconds, you realize that you don't need to have all this crap. And then the impulse stops.
Yeah.
It fades. And it means that 70% of all your purchases, all the purchases in shopping carts worldwide, are being abandoned. And it amounts to a total of $4 trillion a year. And these big tech companies like bol.com, like I said, ING, Amazon, they want to have more of these purchases on impulse. They say, well, you know what, if we have digital identity, once you click, your money is gone. So you can only regret what you did. That's why we need digital identity. Everything needs to be put in one little app. They send this a report, and it's called Digital Identity, a Strategic Imperative from Klaus Schwab. They send it to the Dutch government. The Dutch government says, wait a minute, if these American companies make more money, that is a societal benefit. That's an opportunity for society. That's literally how they call it. So they communicate to the Dutch parliament. They say, well, you know what? We are going to do this because it is so important for the Dutch people that these American companies make more money. I thought everybody was talking about climate change, but no, send me more shoes, send me more shoes. Well, all right. What happens is the Dutch parliament rejected this notion. They said, we don't want to have a digital identity because that also requires a new social security number on a European level. And we don't want that. And in the Netherlands, according to Article 81 of our constitution, the Dutch parliament is the legislative arm of government. Like the trias politica, how Mr. de Montesquieu suggested it. So you have your judge, you have your politician, and your or the executive power and legislative power. And the Dutch parliament can legislate, as they call it. So if they say something, if they vote against an idea, then it becomes law. And then the government says, no, wait a minute, we have talked to the World Economic Forum, we're going to proceed with this. So,
but how does this work then? How can you force through, like, as a government and just basically act against your constitution?
Well, that's very interesting. So I know that there are people who are trying to stop this, but that's where you're heading. So it's Article 81 of our Constitution, and it deals with the relationship between the government, Parliament, and the people, and that's just being broken. And then Article number 1 of the Dutch Constitution, but also in other countries, banning racial discrimination, or that can also be swept aside. It is that easy. We also have Article 9, it deals with physical integrity. If I don't want to get vaccinated, regardless of maybe all the amount of proof in favor of vaccination, if I say, no, it's my body, I don't want it for whatever reason, it is my body. That was swept aside a little bit. Then they said, oh, no. Then we said, okay, it's too dangerous to go outside and protest. What the municipality of Amsterdam did is that they said, well, we have a list of subjects for which you can go out and protest, like racism and climate change, for example. If during the pandemic, if you would organize a racism or climate change protest, that would be allowed. But if you were against these measures, then the police would be sent after you, and they would beat the crap out of you. I've seen it. That's so the government can decide when you can use your right to protest. That's a complete breach with our constitution. And it happens again and again and again. And then after a while, maybe the first article, the ban on racial discrimination, that will also get sacrificed. And that's what's going on right now with this digital agenda. And CBDC is the epitome of it, because society doesn't need CBDC. But then, why do you push through with it? What is it?
Exactly.
It's not. It's not as if people like you and me that we're asking for. Please give me CBDC.
No, I love CBDC T-shirts. We should get that now. But to come back, I think maybe a good angle would be to also look at the environment we're in, right? Like in terms of financial stability.
Yes. The
banking system. We've seen the second biggest banking crisis in the US unfold a few months ago, beginning of the year, and followed suite with Credit Suisse and all of that. You've investigated really thoroughly the balance sheets of banks in the last, I think, 7-8 years, right?
Yes.
You've also unveiled in 2016 already, like the Deutsche Bank was already bankrupt, UniCredit as well. You're a really big nerd in when it comes to balance sheets, and I think you were also one of the very few in at least Europe, or to my knowledge, and especially in the Netherlands, that's for sure, who actually gave it attention and already warned and alarmed about that actual situation. So
exactly, but it is for this reason. This digitalization is partly a result of financial instability. You need this repression, you might call it, to save your banks. And maybe, let's put it this way, maybe if I were in charge, if I were the prime minister, maybe I would have done the same. Maybe our prime minister or other heads of government, they know stuff that we don't. That they say, well, you know what? our banks and our financial system is so unstable.
It's a one-way road.
Yes.
Yeah. So
we need to do this.
Because we have inflation that persists. Like we've seen inflation now decrease in the last months. At first we had transitory inflation, as they called it.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
It peaked, and it accumulated now for at least 2-3 years. It compounded every year, from ranging for 4 to
it compounds
12%. And if you just compound 2% over the next 20 years, that's half of your savings.
More than half of your savings is gone. Yes,
2%.
That's it. And if 2% or 5 or 10 or 17, if it persists for some time and it is not being corrected, then it is never transitory again. It stops being transitory once it is being corrected. But you never get a correction like that. So people will see 10-15% inflation. Housing prices much worse, but they are not measured in the inflation metric. So if you see 10 or 15% inflation, it's much worse because a young couple wanting to buy a house, the erosion of their savings goes much faster. And then they get a 5 or 8% wage hike.
Yeah, and then we have also the interest rate deadlock, where interest rates are high. I think, like just for example, mortgages in the UK, it's approximately 7 or 8% already. And I think the Bank of England already announced that they were going to aggressively continue hiking. The Fed said they will only pause in June. The ECB already actually hiked last meeting, and they're planning to still hike. And I think it's since COVID, or since 2020, maybe 2019 already, we've seen really very atypical years of in terms of
very interesting.
The financial system, but also in terms of geopolitics, with what's unfolding right now in Ukraine and Russia. So we have all kinds of elements that are very different than maybe what we've seen in history. Would you agree so, or do you think that there's parallels that we can draw?
Okay, if you look at
how late are we in the stage in the cycle? I would say.
Okay, if we look at the end of the Second World War, the United States was in debt. They had a very high debt ratio. However, their mobilized armed forces returned to the United States. They started making babies, so you had a demographic dividend, as they call it. So after 20 years, you have a much larger pool, a labor force. They start working. Your economy grows like a MF, I wanted to say, but I'm not going to do that. But then in the end, those people will retire. And you, as they say it, you must grow rich before you grow old. European countries were indebted as well, but they were helped by the Marshall aid that the United States got. Marshall Plan, absolutely. Even Germany, don't let...
Western part.
The Western part. So you might compare to that situation. The problem is that we have right now is that at that time you could outgrow your government debt situation. I mean, if your economy grows faster than your debt, then the problem evaporizes. That's not going to happen right now, because that same baby boom generation is going to retire right now. And you can simply talk to people who work in healthcare in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, for example. All these people that are now, let's say, 70, and they say they are still somewhat active, and they eat too much and they drink too much. Once they really retire and grow old, and they are 80, and they need a massive amount of healthcare, and these babies aren't being born. It's that simple. So in the end, a quarter or 1/3 of our entire pool of labor, let's put it, we're talking about people, of course, but will be dedicated towards healthcare. Unless, of course, you have some form of digitalization or robot technology or whatever. But you don't know that. Technology isn't there yet. And you can simply ask, like I said, a manager in a nursing home or whatever, that, okay, what's the situation over here with your labor shortages? And it's terrible, and it will only increase.
Yes, and it's everywhere as well. It's not just healthcare. Yeah.
That's it. So you're not going to grow out of it that easily.
So the demographic problem is a problem because newly people that we need to contribute to that pension system as well, in order to roll out the contribution to that big, let's say,
Yes, the
piggy
pyramid.
bank, huh?
Yeah.
The pyramid scheme that the pension plan, the pension system might appear to be. Huh?
Yes, and they can say, okay, then we need migrants. We're going to immigrate our problems away. That's not going to work, because the most productive migrants that we get, those are the people from Eastern Europe, and they work very hard, fantastic people. However, they have their own labor shortages. The total fertility rate in Poland, for example, is lower than it is in the Netherlands.
Wow.
So in the end, we're going to run out of Poles. What you could do then is that you say, well, you dump your demographic shortages eastward. Well, if you're Poland, you could actually ask for Ukraine joining the European Union. That happened in effect with the association agreement.
Well, actually, a good fact about that is Germany has never seen such a population increase than this year in the last... I need to check that, but at least the last 30, 40 years.
No, it's insane, yes.
Due to Ukrainian refugees.
That's it.
Millions.
And what people say is, well, we need to be good, we need to protect refugees, and I'm absolutely in favor of that. But once you mix the social and the economic discussion, it could turn nasty, because somewhere in the future you might say, well, maybe I should protect you, but I don't need you, so I'm not going to protect you. So when people say we need to welcome these refugees because we can use them for our labor shortages, that's a very dangerous way of thinking. But maybe let's leave that for a second.
Yeah.
You can't rely on the import of Ukrainian labor forever.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you do that, you're in effect facilitating ethnic cleansing. Those people should go back. Mm-hmm. Not because I don't like Ukrainian people, but it's their country. They need to rebuild it. Dutch people can cook their own food. They don't need meal delivery every day.
Yeah. But the problem is essentially structurally speaking, also globally seen, apart if we look at maybe some countries in Africa, and even in Asia, even China, which is the most populated area in the world.
Also, they will also
shrink.
It's
population decline. So overall, I think also Elon Musk,
he said it, but he's right.
He's like, one of the biggest problems is not overpopulation, is depopulation.
It's also yes. It's the it's a shortage of working age people. That's where you're heading.
So then back to the topic then about like the stability of the system. Then
absolutely.
What the implications of that?
The implication is very simple. You're never going to repay those debts. Mm-hmm. Look at Italy, for example, has a very low fertility rate. The country joined the euro with nearly 110% debt to GDP. They promised to lower it. Now they're going towards 200. And they said, no, it's because of the pandemic. It's because of the pandemic. It's because of Lehman Brothers. Because of the war. Whatever. No, it always goes up. Italy always piles up debt. More debt, more debt, more debt. And then the ECB says, well, I want to keep the euros together. We don't want to have another debt crisis in the Eurozone. So we'll buy all this debt. It's that simple. So while the working age population in Italy is shrinking, their debt to GDP ratio grows. And that's a problem. A country could say, well, you know what, let's shrink a little, and then we give something back to the environment, for example. Mm-hmm. You can't think like that. Absolutely. I think it should be debatable. But what should be clear also is that if you do that, if you walk down that path with accepted, well, let's say depopulation, you also get degrowth. And if you get degrowth, you can never grow out of your own debt. Mm-hmm. And that means that you need debt reduction. You need to repay your debt. So all the richer people need to repay all those debts. Because if you leave it up to the next generation to fix it, the problem for them will be much harder to fix for the next generation of people in Italy or the Netherlands or whatever for that matter. Then also people say, well, we should look at the Islamic world and immigrate them. Interestingly, is that countries like Turkey and Morocco, they also have fertility rates below inflation. Not inflation, the replacement rate. So they grow old as well. If people say, well, Islamic people can't integrate, well, they can integrate. Look at what they do. They also modernize, which also means that they have a large, high government debt. Also in Turkey, I was recently in Turkey. And the central bank needs to perform, some sort of magic to keep it all together. Mm-hmm. So in the end, where you're going is that you need debt reduction. Italy is never going to fully repay its debt. Or you must organize aggressive policy to address tax evasion and tax avoidance in Italy. You could do that for rich people.
But that would again imply more financial control and
yes,
financial repression.
Maybe, yes. So that's the options that you have. Once you let it escalate, so you know for a fact that once you grow old, you should make sure that you grow rich. Like we said, that's why you have a pension fund. If a nation like Italy, but also France, maybe even UK, if you see them growing old, piling up more debt, no, I'll pay you back tomorrow. How? You're growing old. Look at your median age. Then eventually you will hit rock bottom.
Yeah,
it's very easy to understand where it comes from.
Or you also have the technological deflationary forces with the advance of AI, robots. But in order for that to basically counterweight the inflationary pressures that we are witnessing now, it needs to be radically more present or have some real progress in there.
If you can build a robot that will replace a number of jobs right now, I think that would be fantastic. But it's not that easy.
Yeah.
And it's also a very dangerous gamble. You say, well, you know what? Conceptually, you can imagine that that degrowth means debt reduction. But you know, maybe technology will save us. That's a very dangerous gamble. You can't do that. You can't play with the lives of your children.
It's not there yet. Yes,
it's not there yet.
Yeah.
And when it's not there yet, you can't make any estimates. You can't do modeling.
So from one side, if I want to resume it, we have debt we cannot repay, and we have inflation we cannot keep in control.
Yes, because if you want to keep the inflation under control, you need to increase the interest rates, but then your debt becomes more unsustainable.
Yeah.
It's as we say in Dutch, you want to be bitten by the dog or the cat.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the size of your cat.
I prefer the cat, but yeah, I think that I would go for the cat.
If you see the kinds of cats that people have these days. But anyway, you see the problem.
I got the point. Yes.
You should have prevented this decades ago. You could have seen this happening. Now the problem is, okay, central bank will have to be very active. You'll need to have a very big program of quantitative easing. Interest rates should be low. That makes it impossible to fight inflation. So that's collateral damage. And then afterwards, the central bank will come to a point where you say, well, we need to stimulate the economy, lower the interest rate when it's already negative. And this discussion started in 2016 because at that point in time, inflation was negative. And do you know what happens when you make when you reduce the interest rate? So you go below, so you decrease while you're already below zero. Do you know what happens? People go to the ATM and they withdraw their money. Not in large droves, absolutely not, but it is a measurable effect. And the ECB put it on their website. And then they said, well, actually, we need a substitute for cash. Put very simply. They use more diplomatic words, but that's it. That's where you're going.
And so when you look at globally, there's a website called atlanticcouncil.org, and they track CBDCs
I've seen it.
all over the world. So on here you will see on the screen like a map visualizing the whole development of CBDCs.
Yes, who's studying it?
Yeah. Exactly. And there's 11 countries that have fully launched a digital currency so far.
Yes, like Nigeria, the Bahamas.
Exactly, Bahamas and Jamaica and so on. And all G7 economies have now moved into the development stage of a CBDC. So that's quite it's the biggest economies in the world, and then 114 countries representing over 95% of global GDP are exploring a CBDC.
Yes, that's not entirely true.
Okay, tell me why.
No, well, for example, you have the Danish central bank, the Deutsche Nationalbanken, and they wrote a report, which means that they are studying it. I mean, anybody can study anything. I mean, okay. They were studying it and they said, we don't see the value added to the Danish economy.
Okay, clear.
That's it. That's also a study, right?
I've done.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't want to belittle the dance and the economy, but they do not represent, I think, a very significant percent of global GDP. I think the countries we really should focus on are China, the US, UK.
I disagree with that.
Yeah, in which way?
If you have a well-organized country, I think you can learn a lot from Denmark. If you're probably any other country, apart from the household debt, it's also very high, just like it is in the Netherlands. But it is an advanced economy. It is a social democratic country, you might say, with a certain amount of social welfare. I hope they can keep on affording it. But it's an open economy, so it's not a socialist country, if you want to put it that way. If you want to start a business in Denmark, they say, well, do it, go ahead. You can start your business in a day, which is part of the success of that country, and that's why their economy can afford to subsidize the welfare state. I mean, it goes hand in hand. It's look at that. If you're Nigeria, you look at Denmark, you might say, okay, the way they figured it out, organize their roads, it's in healthcare and education, whatever. If an advanced country like Denmark says, we have cash, which is easy, simple to use, offline, gives us an anchor, it's financial bank money, but you can also make digital payments through your banking application. And they fulfill all the needs of our society. I mean, what more could you wish for? You can make real-time payments within Europe with your banking app. And and if there's no internet, or if it's inconvenient, or for whatever reason, you can also use cash. That's perfect. Why would you need a CBDC? My point is that if they come to this conclusion, then other developed states should as well.
Yes, but that's just on a national level. In the case of the European Union, it's a transnational level. So there's a governing entity like the European Commission that has plans and an agenda to maybe harmonize the payment system, which is also an interesting question, right? Is why don't we have a working, effective pan-European financial railway system? We don't. We have all kinds of different. If you go to Belgium, it's Bankcontact. If you have in Germany, it's SEPA-Überweisung. In the Netherlands, it's
we use Ideal.
Ideal.
You want to fix this? It's very simple. I recently bought some software. It was from an American company. And the American company said, how do you want to pay? Do you want to use a credit card? Because they love credit cards. I don't know why. Or would you like to use Ideal or SEPA? It's that simple. You can have websites, you can have companies, fintech companies that will make a widget on your website.
Yeah, Molly, for example, does that. Molly. Payment provider. Yeah,
it's that simple.
But they take a commission of that, so you create more and more intermediaries as well.
Okay, but maybe you can do it more efficient.
It's more costly.
But it isn't hardcore science. I mean, it's a number in a computer system, digital payments. It isn't that hard. If you really want to make this more efficient, you could foster competition or whatever. If you do a complete overhaul of your financial system for this particular reason, that's not a reason. And the idea behind it is that the central bank in the European Union realizes that they're sitting on an enormous amount of debt because they are the ones buying it. If, for example, Italy, if they promise to do something about their government budget, they promise it every year, but they break their promises every year. And all the additional amount of government debt that Italy issues goes directly to the central bank. So if you were to default, if Italy were to do that, or the ECB would suggest that, the ECB itself would be bankrupt. That's the interesting part. They know that under that circumstances, if the interest rate will go up, that's what you're seeing with Silicon Valley Bank. If you have a large amount of government bonds, perceived safe, but you can also go bust on safe government bonds. That's very interesting. That's the duration problem. Same could happen to the ECB. So the ECB knows if the interest rate would ever go up, the whole party would be over. To fight inflation, at least to some extent, we have seen several rate hikes. Look at the amount of damage it did. Central banks are unwilling to go a lot further. They would never go to 10%, for example, or 6%.
Or at least the level of inflation that is currently.
That is, which is what you should do.
Level.
Yeah, it's a Taylor rule. People should look it up. The thing is that the central banks, they know that once at a certain point in time, they will be at a zero. There will be the zero lower bound. That's what it's called. Once you stimulate the economy at zero interest, by lowering the interest rate, people start withdrawing their funds. It's that simple.
Yeah, because you need to effectively what it translates into plain English is if there's a minus 2% interest at your savings account, if your savings account is minus 2%, it means you are paying the bank 2% of that amount that you've saved at the bank.
Then you say,
the primary purpose of the bank is to keep your money and make a little bit of interest because, well, you're borrowing them the money.
That's it. Then the whole show would be over because then you start withdrawing.
So it's a very perverted,
absolutely, but
the whole system is corrupting itself, actually.
Yes.
It's not even capitalistic anymore because you do not get interest or some benefit from lending your money.
No, exactly.
So
that's the
old
old
nature.
world. Yes.
It's corrupting. It's corrupting itself. It's essentially what the definition is. It's a cancer.
But it is. But that's what we were told in school. It doesn't apply to the situation in the streets anymore.
That's what's
life.
interesting as well. That's why I'm saying I have never seen such thing before in history with not just the financial part, which maybe you can go back to Second World War or the 70s with those amounts of inflation, but the levels of debt, the levels also of geopolitical instability, social instability, climate change, if you believe it or not, it's still a topic, and it doesn't matter if you believe it or not.
I'm not saying anything.
No, but then of course the difference of the agenda of it and the ideologies behind it. But if we look at all those levels together, it's now really those past 2-3 years have been insane, really insane. If you would just open any newspaper,
totally agree with you.
It's you can't even process it. And then with the rise of AI, and I've seen some terrifying things and developments as well in that level. It feels like we're really in this curve of exponential derailment or decoupling of reality. Or realities.
And then governments say, well, then maybe we should have a CBDC to use it for whatever purpose.
I love how you just put that back in the topic. Yeah. So, but then CBDC would be the lifeline for that, let's say, the last grip of control. Let's go this way, maybe, because things are derailing and getting out of control and in so many ways. What is the common denominator in all of that? It's money, because it fuels the system. Without money, you cannot do anything. And for that, you need to be able to control it, but you need to be able to control it through certain tools. And those certain tools are CBDCs. So maybe
yes, it's very
first
simple.
The question is, especially for, let's say, most people who watch this, they are already maybe interested in the topic, but for those, and that's also, I think that the aim of this video that we're doing, maybe it would be good to also be transparent about that, is to really expose the risks and also the consequences of what a society would look like, or your life, our lives, if CBDCs truly would be forced upon us, because apparently we will not, based on what we will share, agree on that voluntarily.
Okay.
What is a CBDC?
A CBDC is a form of appearance of a currency.
So the abbreviation is central bank digital currency.
Yes, absolutely. It's central bank digital currency. So the central bank issues cash, something you can hold in your hand, but there's also the digital variant.
And this cash is legal tender.
It's legal tender, yes. And this is legal tender as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can make your payments with it, and it's wonderful. And it really looks like the card that your bank issues as well. So there's no need for it for a personal.
In appearance, it looks just like money, like your bank.
It is
bank
money,
account. But in the background,
yes. What's happening in the background is this. What you can do is you have a store of value, as you call it. So you have the value-based variant of central bank digital currency. That's what some people are promoting, and you can simply compare it to a debit card. You can put some money on it. You can make payments rather than using cash. But those cards already exist, and the additional benefits to ordinary citizens isn't clear. Then there's also the variant, which is called the account-based variant, and then you need to use some login system. like you do on your social media or your existing banking app or your mail or WhatsApp or whatever. You log in and there you have a certain amount, a store of value, and you can use that to make payments. What the central bank has said and what the Dutch government has said in several occasions, simply letters they write to Parliament, ECB has done it, in the Bank of International Settlements, what they say is, if we go for the account-based version with a digital store somewhere, so it's all fictional, it's all based on trust. We could levy a negative interest rate on it. So if you store too much value on your CBDC application, for example, you could get a very large negative interest rate, and that would force you to spend it. And in that way, the central bank can control how you spend your money.
But
and that's called monetary policy transmission.
Yes, but one question about that. Very stupid question. If you spend it, and let's say we're still in this inflationary period, that a lot of experts that also I talk to and I watch online, they say we are really we were in deflationary period until now, and then COVID happened, and after that, with all the money printing, we are entering at least in a decade long, if not even more, inflationary period. If you tell me that you have then an account where you need to spend, doesn't it consumer consumption then
make it worse?
Increase even more inflation?
Yes, so that's my prediction for the next 10 years. Inflation will stay. Okay. Unless, of course, there's a thermonuclear war, I can predict that. But that's the whole problem here. So on the one hand, the central bank should step on the brakes, put interest rates, have much higher interest rates to prevent inflation.
Yes.
But if you do that, a lot of these banks and countries will become much more unstable. Real estate companies, compared to buying a house and then you see the interest rate going up, well, then the value of your house will decline. If you were to do that, the central bank would stay out of the region of negative interest rates. There would not be a zero lower bound, and they would not be needing central bank digital currency. What is more likely is that central banks, and if you work for a central bank, and I also speak to these people, if you're smart, you anticipate a return to the negative interest rate situation. And the fact that central banks are unwilling to really combat inflation, with larger rate hikes, means that they want to go back to very low as soon as they can. And once they are very low, and you have a next crisis, the one that we don't know of yet, could be soon, then you will need to stimulate when you're in negative interest rate territory, and then you need a CBDC. So it takes a few years to build it. If you're smart, you start building it right now. So that means, indeed, if you build these tools, it's all inflationary. By the way, if you create central bank digital currency in a digital system, while there is also cash, you increase the money supply. If people think about it, people think, well, CBDC is not a replacement of cash. That's a conspiracy theory. The interesting part is, and the Dutch central bank has said it on multiple occasions, if you would have a certain amount of cash in society and you would create CBDC next to it, then you would double the money supply. And the only way of preventing that is to only create CBDCs and hand them out to people. That's what the Bahamas does right now. If you go to a wine festival,
yeah, it's like an airdrop.
Yes,
let's say what
helicopter money. Yes. But then you need to also starve at the same time some ATMs from cash. So the balance stays the same.
Yeah.
And if you do that, and I think that's where we're heading, then CBDC is a replacement of cash. It makes perfect sense. But for people, there's no need to have this, so to say. So the central bank and governments, they want to have a means of stimulating the economy that is suffering from demographic collapse and other things, and too much credit. But I don't want it. I don't want you to have the power over me to levy negative interest rates on me. I mean, if I'm sitting on my savings and I don't want to spend it, if you're the central bank and I'm just an ordinary citizen, I could understand why you want to be able to stimulate me into spending more. But if I don't need those extra shoes,
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Yes.
So that's also very interesting. If you see public hearings about this, and then some member of parliament says, "Well, can the central banker please explain to me why this is to the benefit of a person, of your ordinary citizen?" They can't.
Well, they would, I think in most cases, they are working on this narrative saying that, yeah, it's about financial inclusion. So people who don't have a bank account, get them a bank account.
Everybody in the Netherlands has a bank account. We're a highly digitized society.
It's about broader than the European Union, I think. I think it's really from a global agenda.
Okay, so if people in Nigeria don't have a bank account, you should improve the system in the Netherlands or Denmark. If you think about it, it doesn't make sense.
No, because I think the whole idea is that, and that's also something I wanted to mention, is that the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, they are working on harmonizing all kinds of digital, CBDCs, digital fiat money projects are all around the world, and consolidated into like one big system, right? Because that's also what they're doing, the Bank of Central Banks. But in tandem and collaboration, coordination with the United Nations, for example, or the World Economic Forum.
And what you can also do is that once you have this digital system where you need to, with which you can prove your identity, you get a digital ID. You can use it for other purposes. You can hand out health passes and that sort of.
Exactly. I think that's also like to make maybe like the overview a bit more simple. Is that in order to have a CBDC, in order to have a wallet, any type of service nowadays, you mentioned it before, you need an identity mechanism. You need,
because if I want to use my app, how does my phone or my app know that is me?
The unique identifier.
It's me.
It's me, Mario.
Like the ING app. It's called It's Me. Well, how do you know it's me?
It's me you're looking for.
Because I'm identifying myself. So it's digital identity. You can't do all this without digital identity.
So thereby there will be a part of that plan is to force upon. We've seen that one way or another. It doesn't, and now of course it's gonna sound like again like maybe conspiracy theory. Like
we don't need. I think we don't need to say that because. Yeah. It's all out in the open. It's all official documentation.
With, for example, like the QR codes for vaccination and all of that. Like we've already seen a precursor of what something could look like in case of emergency. And as you mentioned also earlier, we don't know when, under false pretenses, we might see again some sort of crisis, if it's financial, health, environmental, whoever knows, or even war. That some certain measures are being imposed upon us. So we have the digital part and we have the wallet part.
Yes.
And in Europe, those two are being developed as we speak. And maybe it would be good to then dive into kind of like the timeline of when it first started and where we are at now, and what can we expect in the coming months in the year.
Okay. Well.
Let's first take the digital identity part.
The digital identity, you could say that it started in 1999. You had the digital the directive for doing business online, and it's very simple. If I email you and I say I want to do a business transaction and we communicate, it's the same as a written signature. So it reduces paperwork. Very good. Then around 2011, they came up with the idea of European healthcare. So I should be able to identify myself in a French hospital. So if I drive
that card. If you look at the back of your health insurance card, it's the blue thing, right?
Yes.
It's the blue part of the card.
That's it. That's the whole idea. That, for example, if you have an accident in another European country and you're in a hospital, the doctors over there, they need to be able to access your medical records without having to make sorts of calls. And that's exactly. And if you look at the text, the legal text, the preamble. It says, it says two very interesting things. It says, we want to be able to facilitate this. We want to help Europeans because 2011 was a new directive. It said, cross-border healthcare. Interesting part was that it mentioned that hardly anybody will ever use it because most people don't travel that much beyond borders in the European Union. Maybe or not as much as the European Commission would like it. So to make one standard for all Europeans, one electronic medical health record system, that wouldn't make sense. Then in 2013, the European Commission said the time for voluntary action, voluntary space is over, because we wanted to have one single standard for all European health records. So everybody who sometimes drives to France in a car, but hardly anybody does it, they say, well, it hasn't delivered what we hoped for, so we are going to enforce it. And then in 2014, they had the EIDAS directive, and it is electronic identification, also for health purposes. And what this document mentions, and it's very interesting, it says, well, you have, with respect to, for example, medical data, you have primary use, which is when your doctor looks into your files. Oh, you're the one with the broken leg. You know what? Doctor should be able to do that. Look into your records. Perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. That's primary use. Secondary use is trading your data, selling your data.
For insurances and stuff.
Maybe, but that's illegal. In the Netherlands, that's illegal.
It's fully, yeah.
So you're organizing something, but of course, insurance companies will want to have access to all your records, maybe to refuse customers. And there are reasons to assume that they want this and that they're acting in that direction. But once again, that doesn't benefit me. I mean, if I say I need to have a system for medical health records, electronic system, which is good for primary and secondary use. Secondary use doesn't help me. I don't need it. But anyway, they started to fund this program anyway, Digital Europe. There was a new directive, new version in 2018, and we went into the pandemic with just that. And then there was this Corona fund. There was a pandemic fund. 800 billion euro was mobilized on European scale. And a significant part, at least a quarter, must go to digital health. Corona fund is being financed by bonds that need to be repaid before 2058. So until 2058, we will pay money to make sure that Digital Europe goes ahead, although the pandemic is gone. That's the perverse effect of the pandemic. Everybody said, oh, well, then we need a European passport for the pandemic. Well, the thing is, if the pandemic is over and you've already financed it, it's still there. It's not going to go away. Then the central bank said, hey, wait a minute, that's interesting. If we want to have central bank digital currency, and we need a platform, a self-identification platform, we could use EID. Yeah. So it's used on multiple occasions. And the Netherlands said, well, our Dutch parliament is very skeptical about this. But the Dutch government said, and additional benefits of all your aspects of your identity in one single system, is that these American companies make more money. Against the will of Dutch parliament and Dutch people. That's the World Economic Forum report. Yes. Strategic imperative. People, very often, they say you're a loony if you mention this. But you should do this. If you can't imagine this, that this is how it works, look for digital identity vision in the register of the European Parliament. And then there's a discussion on why are we actually doing this? What is the benefit of all of this? And this is the official answer of our government. They say, well, people will buy more on impulse. That's it. That's the only opportunity for society that they can mention. And if you want to have a really good discussion on this, I would say, make some time, make some room for it. Ask some experts and say, economists, those are digital experts. Why are we doing this? What is the... It's about money and nothing else, and that makes people skeptical and also susceptible to conspiracy theories because it does make no sense. Interestingly, there was on central bank digital currency. The European Commission last year organized a hearing, an online consultation, and you could submit your vision, and there were over 15,000 responses. They were all negative. Because people say it gives you control, it gives the government control, because they can combine all these data, and the police will, without a doubt, use it to connect all the dots. and there's no obvious benefit, so we shouldn't do it.
And we will turn this into a
the police,
panopticon and a
yes,
control state.
Absolutely, in a surveillance state. That's where you're heading. Then a few weeks into the consultation, the European Commission changed that part of the website, and they said, well, we expect we're going to go ahead anyway. So if you do that halfway your consultation period, then it's very clear that you're going to do it, or that you really want to do it. What they said is, we will come up with a proposal for law before the end of the second quarter of 2023, which is now. And then last week, our finance minister, mevrouw Kaag, I will do it in French, otherwise you get the strong G, the Dutch G. Kaag, that's it. She sent a letter to Parliament, and she said, I'll expect it to be there by the 28th of June. Interestingly,
so we are
on the verge. June? Yes. Interestingly, though, the European Commission also in the agenda mentioned that there will be an upcoming legislative initiative in the agenda, but they removed it.
That was also 28th of June.
Yes.
Are we talking about the same thing, or because you're talking about the Sigrid Kaag, the Dutch Parliament?
Yes, we're talking about the same. Because if this is a European initiative, then finance ministers will be informed, but it's the European Commission that will decide on the date and the launch of the actual procedure as well, of the actual legislative draft. And our finance minister said it will be the 28th, and then the European Commission corroborated it, but now they removed it from the agenda, so probably it's not going to happen the 28th.
Yes, because apparently
so it will be postponed.
Yes, the ministers came together, and they there was this article on CoinDesk that I now read because it's the first one I saw, like really covering it, that they will postpone that meeting that was scheduled for the 28th of June. And the Commission did not provide any reason for the delay, nor did it give any new date for publication. And one of the things that actually I found quite funny in a way, but also just so obvious, or like, how do you say that? Just shameless, or it's basically the importance of developing a compelling and clear narrative regarding what would be added value of this development. It means basically, if you just, you and me, like just dissecting this is, well, actually we planned a meeting to announce something truly disruptive that will actually really mean significant implications for your life.
Yes.
But we didn't find any good narrative. Like the PR agency we hired did not give us a good story. Like that's literally
that's literally what's going on.
That is so blatant. It's insulting, actually.
It is, and one of at least for the Netherlands, one interesting document is that our previous minister for the interior, mevrouw Ollongren, she's of Finnish origin. She also asked some universities to build a business case for digital identity. And then some university professors, they came up with CBDC. They said, well, CBDC could be useful because CBDC requires digital identity. And that would have all sorts of benefits from the point of view of the central bank. And they said, then they said to our interior minister, that's a potential business case.
Yeah.
But the silly thing is that this report with potential business cases was published after the decision was made to go ahead with digitalization anyway. So it's exactly like you say. So you make a decision, and once you've done it, you suddenly
justify it.
Yes. Then you suddenly discover that you need to justify it.
It's like you start drinking, and later on you're just like, I need to really find a good reason why I start drinking now. Yeah.
Exactly. And while you're at it, you continue.
Just keep drinking, But so that's the thing, right? Is that, of course, the reason is very clear. We just said it. You just said it. Why they need a CBDC. Why,
from a government point
perspective.
of view. Yes.
Exactly. But as you would be like in any kind of enterprise, or let's put it very simple, any group that wants to solve a problem, needs to first ask the user, how can I help you? It's
Yes.
it's pure basic design thinking. Huh? There's nothing more basic than this. If a
And
doctor,
this never happened.
it's like a doctor that imposes on you a cure that you don't need,
Yes.
or you trying to find a problem to a solution.
That's it.
Like, it doesn't make any sense. And so I think like
That's CBDC and digital identity.
yeah, exactly. And then there's one thing that I thought was quite interesting was also like because you just mentioned like the identity part, but then the CBDC part. At first there was like those different type of progress reports, right? And at first this progress report said, the CBDC may be programmable. Then came the second progress report, and it pivoted based on maybe some research, and it said, well, we will only oversee the issuance and redemption of those digital euros, right? So again, well, only the banks will handle the rest, and the ECB is there just for oversight. Mm-hmm. And then came the third progress report, where they said, well, actually, it will never be programmable. We will not program this. And they actually more and more then came out with different spokespeople.
Do you believe it?
Well, that's the thing, right? And then Lagarde, and this is something, okay, I need to be sure about that and fact check this. But Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, got pranked by those Russian pranksters.
Yes. I saw it
with the interview. So it's
I've
real.
seen it.
You can okay.
Yes.
You can affirm that.
And, yeah.
And I think it's still to be seen on Rumble. I still want to watch it, but I've seen someone report about that, say that about the fact that the digital euro transactions will be controlled indeed by the ECB. So on one hand, they say publicly,
it's digital. It's a digital transaction. It's a digital system.
Every technical
you can
person
do anything.
Can tell you that obviously, in order for a system like this to function, you need to know what's going on.
Yes.
It's not like you're going to launch a rocket without having a control center.
Yes.
It's pretty clear at this point.
So if you at least you will have, and it will start with that, is you will be prevented from having too much money in your CBDC wallet.
Yeah, so
because
3,000 euros is what Panetta said.
Yeah. Otherwise, you would have disintermediation. Your ordinary banks don't like it. Suppose that you really have a system, a deposits bank, where you can say, I will put my savings there, and it will be without risk. That would be fantastic. However, if you would have a system like that, and people don't trust their banks, and maybe they shouldn't, they will start transferring large amounts of money to central bank digital currency. That would make civilians sleep better, but the overstressed financial system that we just managed will lose deposits. So the first thing Panetta also said is, it will not be a deposit bank. After a few thousand euro, you will be blocked. And another option is that you can put more in your CBDC wallet. They will get taxed by a high interest rate, and that will force you to spend. Yeah, so all these things, all the writings are on the wall.
Yeah, so
and once again, it's very, I think it's important for people to understand, because it is digital. A digital contract can be altered by any good programmer. It isn't that hard. It is just numbers.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that
if you say, for example, that's also in the leaked report that they said, well, we shouldn't have interest rates on it. It should be interest rate negative. Well, the real rate is nearing zero, but it doesn't make any sense because you can change it later on.
Yeah. So basically, is to make it simple, because with you, I always like to make analogies because you make them first. So you just build a car and you say that the motor can only go that fast.
Yes.
And you just block it to that speed. And but later on, because of security measures, but then later on you say, well, actually, like we can drive it much faster. So it's
because it's in there.
It's in there, exactly. So the same would be the it's basically, if you strip it down, it's all a matter of PR.
Yes. All digital money is programmable by definition.
Yes.
All cats eat meat. It's the same. I call non-programmable CBDC is like a vegetarian tiger. You can let him play with your kids because you've seen him eat carrots.
That's a good one.
That's it. I mean, trust me. Yeah? And then it's the same central banks that are sitting on piles of uncollectible debt. And they say, well, trust me. No, I'm sorry, I don't trust you. I don't think...
When someone usually says, trust me, you should maybe not trust them.
And the only way to be sure that this tiger doesn't turn out to be non-vegetarian tiger and eat your kids or eat you. I mean, one tiger you can fight with your whole family or 8 people against him. He will eat all of you.
Yes. Yeah.
These animals are so incredibly strong. They aren't built to eat carrots. I mean, it's so obvious. If you look at a tiger, you know what it's built for. And the same applies with CBDC. If you say, well, we have all these options, all these policy options that we will not use. The tiger will not use its superior senses and strong claws and jaws. Of course he will. So how can you not see it?
It's pretty straightforward.
And the only way to prevent this is to not have the system. And that's why I compared it to the death penalty. If you want to make sure that the death penalty, the death sentence, is never handed to somebody who doesn't deserve it, you should abolish the death penalty. For that reason, the Netherlands doesn't have a death penalty anymore. That's the only way you can be sure that it won't be abused. And I think that's sort of ethical thinking, and that's where you're heading. That's what you should do with digitalization and also CBDC. And it's not just, I just read a report, I got an email from from some government official that says, well, you shouldn't worry. It will not be programmable. And I read an article and it's all conspiracy, whatever. No, that's not enough. What kind of real limitations can be put? How can you really prevent abuse?
Exactly.
And the only way to do that, to achieve that, is to prevent certain technologies from being born, just like certain forms of AI. An algorithm that can search through databases full of people based on their race will make terrible decisions. And the only way to prevent that is to respect Article 1 of the Dutch Constitution, which forbids racial discrimination. It's that simple. And now that you see that going wrong, you see it on that subject, you speed up in the same direction, and you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, you're a bit like the Dutch Robert Badinter, the one who was activist of the abolition of the death penalty, but then for CBDCs. So when we look at then the current advances, do you think that in terms of what's been out there, like for example, the US has Fed 24/7, Britain announced recently, the UK Britcoin. Do you think that the digital euro will come to life?
I must say I've asked some questions to the European Commission, to the spokespersons. Haven't had any answers, but it's a weekend. I think that what's if you look for how long this has been a topic. First articles in 2016, and the European Commission Central Bank said we are going to do this. Panetta last night, the ECB.
Is that the article you sent me?
Yes, and he said, well, very negative about Bitcoin, and it always comes to the same conclusion, and that's why maybe we can put it in the comments.
Yes.
So the European Commission says we remove the legislative draft on CBDC from the agenda. We don't say why. Very interesting. Same evening in Basel, Panetta holds a speech, and he said, well, by the way, what government should do is install CBDC. So if you look at the amount of enthusiasm, let's put it that way, in those circles, I think that at some point in time there will be, there will be a legislative draft, a proposal, and then it will be there.
Yes.
And what the ECB also has said, that they have a investigative phase, which does not end by the second quarter of 2023, which is now, but they have an additional 3 months. What could happen, and I think that's a reasonable prediction, is that the ECB will communicate some more with the European Commission, and that in 3 months there will be a draft anyway.
Is this democratic, this whole process?
This is democratic?
Is this democratic?
No, absolutely not. What happens in the Netherlands is that again, with these, we call it the toeslagenaffaire.
Which translated in
it's
English.
It's the you get grants in the
Social
Netherlands,
benefits.
social benefits.
Scandal.
There is some fraud within it, and they used algorithms to track people down. Algorithm used,
as you mentioned before. Yes.
Exactly. The government stepped down and said, "Oh, we are so sorry that this went wrong." I mean, thousands of people were
Ruined their whole lives.
It ruined their lives. Exactly. I mean, if you can't pay your debts,
And
they will take your children.
And they were already poor.
Yes,
Those people.
and then you hurt them some more.
Yeah.
It's that bad. Then the government said we will step down because of this. A few weeks after they promised to step down, which they didn't, of course, they published these papers that said we should continue with digitalization. If you're a Democrat, what you should have done at that point in time, we say, okay, we've made a terrible mistake. How will we progress into the digital future? How can we safeguard certain human rights? How can we prevent abuse? What opportunities are there? What is the business case of certain? But they didn't do that. Our government didn't do that. They said, well, we made a terrible mistake, what we will pursue anyway. Then Parliament stepped in and says, no, we don't want this unique European identifier. They said, oh, whatever.
Skip.
Yes. Oh, you have the right to say that because of our constitution. Well, we are enthusiastic, so no, that's not democratic. Sorry, that's not democratic.
Yeah. Okay, that's very reassuring, obviously. Yeah. Well, what does it say about the future? I mean, what kind of potential a digital euro could then come to life then? Under which form?
You will have this digital identity anyways.
So European-wise, like what would that look like exactly?
Well, it's like a wallet with all the aspects of your identity and your digital identity in the same wallet, like your driving license, your banking information, etc., and your CBDC, and that will come anyway. For example, there has been a new European initiative to abolish physical driving licenses. So, for example, if a policeman wants me to identify myself, so could you use your app? I said, no, I don't like this app because my parliament was against it. Then the police man or woman will probably respect me. I know that. Now I can say, but if you truly want me to identify myself, I could show you my driving license. It's pretty fraud-proof. Well, now the European Commission says we will abandon physical driving licenses.
But if I'm going abroad, let's say...
you have to use the app.
Without app, but then you're forced to have a smartphone.
Yes.
Thereby you can be tracked. I mean, it's common knowledge, like the access that major tech companies have if it's an Android or an iPhone.
Why do I need it? I mean, every time that I needed to identify myself with police...
Let me resume this because it's really ironic when I think about it.
You create
the whole narrative of inclusion is actually exclusion, meaning...
Yes.
If you don't have a smartphone or you don't want to comply with the implications that an iPhone, a smartphone, Android, Samsung, whatever you name it, a smartphone has on you, it can track you, it can listen to you, it can photograph you, it can do all kinds of things.
They have a monopoly.
And exactly on top of that, it's a cartel. So you must go into that, this panopticon, in order to be inclusive, but thereby you exclude the ones that do not comply to that. So
and I'm not against digitalization, but for this digital European driving license to work, you need to have a European unique identifier. And my parliament voted against it. Very often my parliament votes in favor of things that I don't like certain speeding limits that I think that are quite absurd, but I will respect them. Now, my parliament says we should not have a European unique identifier. Simply for that reason, I don't want to use it because I respect my parliament, and now I'm being forced to use it.
Yeah, but
that's not democratic.
But it's quite outrageous, and the fact that you just say it like that, just so casually, and the fact that nobody really talks about it or has seen at least no major news items over it. But also the least, that's the least important. The most important is that if we work or if we live in a society where we have judicial, what you just mentioned, executive and legislative powers that are the pillars of democracy, and maybe the press and the freedom of expression, but all those are basically stamped upon or basically ignored, how does it function? The fact that the European Court of Justice does not call on the Netherlands, say what you're doing is anti-constitutional.
No.
No, but for real, no, really.
No, I mean, I'm baffled by this as well, and I think that a lot of people don't know what's going on actually. What I said with the driving licenses, that they will be abolished. 99.9% of the Dutch people don't know it. Even members in parliament. I was there a few weeks ago. I'm there quite often.
So that's actually a good point. Yeah,
people don't even know it, but when people know it, there can be an outrage, and then you can start the whole discussion. And what our governments are doing is that, in the build-up towards the discussion on digitalization, they are making sure that certain things are being arranged at bullet train speed.
Yeah, but that's a problem, right? Like the fact that you've spoken to some members of parliament in the Netherlands, so Dutch members of parliament.
Yes, who don't know this.
You've also been in Brussels, right?
Yes.
What can we still do then if we look at all this madness?
Well, I think that the most important part is that you inform yourself and that you inform others around you. For example, like I said with the physical driving license, if there will be a new government that is not in favor of this digitalization and does not want to have a unique European digital identifier for the simple reason that our government or our parliament voted against it, I believe in parliamentary democracy. So when Parliament votes for something, even something that I don't like, I will respect it. But then you have to be consistent with that. If, for example, if this driving license things goes through and a future government says, no, we shouldn't have done that, the problem is that your capacity to build physical driving licenses has been abolished as well. So you're dependent on this European technology. You're dependent on this cartel of a few companies like Amazon, etc., that build CBDCs, that build these wallets, and the bank. So you must be quite quick, but you can still do a lot about it, because if you don't want to be included, you use the word financial inclusion. Wow, you are being included. Yay. No, but I don't want to be included. You should make sure that there are options to be excluded, which is being able to pay with cash for simple things like groceries. But mainly the largest issue is that that people don't know what's going on. And like I always said, a major news outlet in the Netherlands is RTL News. You can go to their website and see how often they discuss the topic of central bank digital currency. And you can make a ratio. You can say, okay, number of articles on central bank digital currency, number of articles on Kim Kardashian. And a huge hiney. Do you know what the ratio is?
Yeah, well, it must be 1 to 100 or something.
It is 1 to 1,439.
You made that calculation.
I've calculated it. So for every one article, and it is one article on central bank digital currency from 2020, so the largest Dutch news outlet produces one article on CBDC 3 years ago, one every 3 years. And they do one article per day on Kim Kardashian.
Okay.
So everybody knows everything about Kim Kardashian and her hiney. That's a problem.
Yeah.
If more people were to understand it, they would be more critical of it. So that's what you do in the short run, or what I try to do. I think, hey, wait a minute, people, there's stuff going on, and it's all
public information.
It's public information.
Yeah. So
you should know about it.
Yeah. So I resume. There's been laws and tools that are about to be implemented with digital identity, which means that it's compulsory and obligated for any European citizens.
In effect, yes.
To have a digital identity. It will be coupled to a digital wallet, which at first says, at least is claimed from the ECB, Panetta and Co. and Lagarde, that it will not be programmable, which might actually not be the case at all, because they will be able to control your transactions, control how much money you even have, cap it, have a maximum.
Absolutely.
A limit to spending it, meaning like you have 30 days to spend that amount of money on those certain goods.
That's very feasible, yes.
All those things are then within reach. And on top of that, this whole process is undemocratic and has absolutely no involvement of the people who will be subjected to this.
Because they wouldn't understand why they should have it.
Yeah. Okay.
Which citizen that you know will say, I want my government to have more means to prosecute me?
Yeah, and then it comes to, but that's for maybe for next time then, the whole idea of like having a social welfare with a universal basic income, right? When, let's say, in a scenario in which there's so much unemployment because of disruption of technology or a crisis or something, there will be the need for this kind of deployment mechanism, as we saw during Corona, where the checks were sent from the US government for every household to sustain the shocks. We will see something maybe similar unfold for the implementation of those digital wallets, and thereby like imposing, just like it happened also in Nigeria, where we talked about this before we started the conversation, where you said it was a failure, but then I saw a video where someone was laying out how actually the Nigerian government was asking their citizens to give in their old bills for new bills, but then there was not enough new bills, so there was a shortage of cash.
They needed CBDC,
and so then they basically the only way to pay was this e-naira, and then there was a huge spike into that, and they got the adoption, but they were forced upon.
Yes, exactly. That's not a success. That's not voluntary.
That's a government success. Yeah, that's definitely. Yeah. But thank you, Arno.
You're welcome.
Thanks for this overview, and I think next time we will address the outcomes of that meeting that has been postponed. So we'll see when that happens.
I will be back very soon, and we can talk about it, because honestly, I don't know. I'm very curious. Curious.
Yes.
Curious.
But you're the watchdog. You will let us know, ring the alarms when that happens. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
And people can find you on Twitter. You have a website as well.
Yeah.
You have a Patreon for people that want to support you.
Just
You're
Google Arno Wellens and you'll find
I'll put in the link in the description. Thanks a lot, Arno.
You're welcome. See you next time.